Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominique Velger, and welcome to Understanding President Biden's Student Loan Debt Relief Program. It is my pleasure to have all of you here today. I am Community Engagement Specialist at Harvard University Employees Credit Union. Joining me today are my colleagues. They're behind the scenes. It's Migdalia Gomez. She is AVP of Community Engagement, as well as Mel Martinez, Loan Servicing and Support Supervisor. So before we get started, you are all muted. So if there are anyone, children or dogs barking in the background, we won't be able to hear them. So we'll be using the Q&A feature, and you can start using it right now by letting us know where you guys are joining us from. All right, and while we're doing that, the presentation is being recorded. Just wanted to remind you. So if you miss any portion of it, because there's going to be a lot to cover, you can watch it back on YouTube at MyHUECU to really gather a lot of the information. And at the end, we'll have a survey so you can let us know how we did, what we can do better, and so on and so on. So a quick little background about the Harvard community and our credit union. We're not for profit, so we really exist solely for our members. Once you become a member, you're a member for life. Your spouse can become a member, as well as your children, grandparents. So we kind of like to keep it all in the family. And we also offer a variety of different services, such as credit cards, loans, and we can also help you refinance, as well as we have savings and checking accounts as well. And we have a bunch of different locations, and you can contact us digitally and online, and as well as any of our branches. Let me double check to see where folks are joining us from since I asked that question. Oh, wow. Someone is joining us from Tucson, Arizona, Boston, Lowell. Oh, wow. Harlem, New York. Shout out to Harlem, New Orleans, one of my favorite spots. Boston again, Cambridge, Fitchburg, Cambridge again, Austin. Thank you so much for joining us from everywhere. All right. Someone joining us from the campus. Okay. Westwood, Milford, another Phoenix, Arizona. Wow, we are so happy to have you guys today. And wanted to also remind you, we have a Thrive Financial Wellness. We've partnered with GreenPath, and it's our free financial counseling. We have different blogs with different workshops and different worksheets that you can actually do right on the website. So, and we have calculators, and you can do that all on the portal. So if you want more information, you can also go on huecu.org/thrive. And wanted to let you know that we have a new branch at the Longwood Medical area. If you're in the Boston area, it's close to the Beth Israel West Campus. It's right underneath the Joslin Center, Diabetes Center. So you can just join us. We should be opening up in a couple of weeks. All right, so without further ado, wanted to introduce everyone to Betsy Mayotte and the TISLA team. So thank you, look at Betsy. She looks fabulous. So she is the president and she's the founder of the Institute for Student Loan Advisors, AKA TISLA. She's gonna kind of help sift us through the do's and the don'ts, and she's been an advocate for over 20 years. So without further ado, welcome, Betsy. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, and your team for being here with us today. I'm gonna get off and mute myself and get off video to let you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dominique. And thank you for that welcome. And thank you for hosting this really important topic. To say there's been a lot of questions and confusion around this program would be an understatement. A couple housekeeping things. With me today, I have Bethany Lane. They are also with TISLA, and they are my top team. They're going to be answering questions for you in the Q&A panel. I know that there are a ton of questions. I also know that if I do my job right, I'm going to cover your question in my presentation. So I know people are anxious, but I'm going to ask you to hold off on asking questions in that Q&A panel unless and until I cover the topic that you have a question about, and you still have some confusion, or maybe I didn't answer it or didn't answer it well. If you do sort of get ahead of us, Bethany Lane will let you know in the Q&A to just sit tight. I'm getting to it, and if you still have questions later, absolutely you'll be able to ask it later. Just a little bit about TISLA. This organization was founded in 2017. We just had our 5-year anniversary, as a matter of fact. And our mission is to ensure that all consumers have access to free, expert, and unbiased student loan advice. So anyone can go to our website, which is freestudentloanadvice.org. I'd like to think it's fairly comprehensive and, more importantly, in plain English. You're not required to register. We're never going to ask you for personal information. And if, using the website, if you still have questions or need help, you can email us through our contact page through the TISLA email, and we're happy to answer any question you have, all the questions you have. And again, our mission is to ensure that this is always free to consumers. So we're never going to charge you a penny for that. So with all of that out of the way, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm on the tail end of a cold. I'm hoping not to cough my way through this presentation. I'm also hoping that I don't sound like a frog by the end of the presentation. If I fail on either one of those, please bear with me. I apologize in advance. Okay, so as Dominique mentioned, I have been working in the student loan industry in a compliance or advocacy role for it's actually about 25 years, or since the earth cooled, whichever you prefer. And I can tell you legitimately that the last 2 years are the most bananas that I've ever seen when it comes to student loans, and for mostly really, really good reasons and really, really good things. The current administration has taken advantage of the national emergency that was caused by the pandemic to put some sort of fixes into place that is intended to provide relief to especially the most vulnerable student loan borrowers, the ones that data shows tends to struggle the most. So the problem is that they've had a very short window in which to roll out these programs and implement them. And that unfortunately has caused a lot of confusion. So my goal here today is to go over the 3 biggest waivers, so to speak, or programs that are currently being implemented or soon to be implemented, and try to help you navigate between the 3 of them. So the first thing I'm going to cover is sort of a little bit of a background, just to sort of explain why all this stuff is happening now. Then we're going to go over the August 24th announcement, which is the broad student loan debt relief. We're going to talk a little bit, we're going to do sort of a 5,000 foot level overview of the public service loan forgiveness waiver. And then I'm going to talk about another waiver that's coming called the income driven plan waiver. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about strategy, which programs to pursue, all or none or some, and how to decide. And then of course, at the end, we'll have resources. Okay, so let's talk about the background of this. So, why are we seeing all these sort of big forgiveness programs and waivers coming out right now? And why aren't they being extended beyond, for example, the PSLF waiver has a deadline of October 31st. Why isn't being extended beyond that? Why haven't we seen them before? The truth of the matter is that we actually have COVID to thank for it. Generally, the President of the United States does not have the authority to do anything that's contrary to federal law. Only Congress can change federal law. However, there's a piece of legislation that was written into law years ago called the HEROES Act. And under the HEROES Act, it gives the President of the United States some limited authority to do some things on a temporary basis in situations where the country is under a national emergency declaration. And the Biden administration and the current leadership at the Department of Education is utilizing that authority under the HEROES Act to implement these temporary waivers. So quite a bit of what we see in these waivers, with whether it be the broad debt relief or whether it be the PSLF waiver or that other income-driven plan waiver, I would say off the cuff, 80% of it, if not more, is actually contrary to federal law. So they need to implement these while they have the authority to do it, and they have to really sort of end them or create some sort of end trigger to make sure it doesn't go beyond their authority. Now, part of the risk of that is, well, anytime there's an executive order, there's always the risk that someone could file a lawsuit saying that the president has exceeded their authority to issue that executive order or make that particular change. And if it's, it's possible that if whoever filed the lawsuit is successful in making that legal argument, that this authority or these waivers or whatever can be retracted or reversed. It's a bigger it's a bigger hill to climb than one might think. In order to, I'm not going to get into a social studies lesson or a legal lesson, if for no other reason is that I'm not an attorney and I don't even play one on TV. But in order to file such a suit and have it even make it a tiny way through the court system, the plaintiff has to have what's called standing. So in other words, somebody can't just file a suit saying, I don't like what he did. Someone would have to say, I don't like what he did, and I've been personally harmed by it. And with a lot of these waivers, there's actually not a lot of the people that are much smarter than me and that are legal experts. The general consensus seems to be that for most of this, at least, there probably isn't a lot of people or groups out there that would potentially have legal standing to be able to even get a case through the front door. I'm telling you all this because, especially with the debt relief, there's been a lot of back and forth with the legal authority with the debt relief, and there's actually a hearing going on about one of the cases, I think as we speak, definitely today, the 12th. So that's why some of the information has changed, and that's why some of the guidance has changed, and that's why some of it hasn't even been released yet. So bottom line, I'm sure the question in your mind is, you're probably all going, Betsy, I couldn't care less of everything you just said. Just tell me, what's the risk of reversal of this debt relief program? I don't have a crystal ball. Based on the cases that have been filed so far, I'm not particularly worried. All but one, I think we're close to silly. Just my opinion, not a legal opinion by any means. The one that might have had some small baby teeth, I'm not even particularly worried about that one. And that one is the one that there's a hearing about today. There could be other suits filed in the future that have bigger teeth. But as of right now, I think the risk of overall debt relief reversal is fairly slim. Okay, so with that background, let's dive into the overall broad debt relief. There isn't really a name for this program yet. Online, they call it the Biden-Harris debt relief. From a generic standpoint name, I tend to call it the broad student loan debt relief. So if you hear me say debt relief, it's likely I'm talking about this program. So let's start with the basic eligibility. Who's potentially eligible for this broad debt relief? The short answer is any Department of Education held federal student loan. Now, there used to be 2.5 primary student loan, federal student loan programs. There was the Federal Direct Loan Program, and there was the Federal Family Education Loan Program, and then on a smaller scale, there was the Perkins Loans Program. They have discontinued making new Perkins loans and are phasing that program out. And in 2010, they stopped making new FFEL loans. However, there's still about 4 million federal student loan borrowers out there that are still holding these Federal Family Education Loan Program loans, or these FFEL loans. And as you're going to see, some of these FFEL loans are going to be eligible for the debt relief, but most of them are not going to be. If you have a federal direct loan, however, it absolutely is potentially eligible for the broad debt relief. Now, a federal direct loan can be a Stafford loan, both subsidized and unsubsidized. It can be a graduate plus, it can be a parent plus, it can be a consolidation. Unfortunately, a FFEL loan can also be a Stafford loan, a graduate or parent plus, or a consolidation. How to tell whether you have a FFEL or direct loan, or whether you have a Department of Education held FFEL loan, or what we call a commercially held FFEL loan. The first thing to do is see when the loan was made. If the loan was made on or after July 1st, 2010, and it's either a Stafford loan, a grad or parent plus, or a consolidation loan, then you know that it's a direct loan because they didn't make any new FFEL loans after June 30th of 2010. If it was made before July 1st of 2010, you can log into the Department of Education's website, which is studentaid.gov. And either Ben or Elaine will throw that link up into the Q&A panel. I think you have to ask yourself a question and then answer it to do that. But if you log into your studentaid.gov account, if you look at the loan detail, you want to look and see who the lender of the loan is and who the servicer is. And if anywhere on there it says Department of Education, then you know that it is potentially an eligible loan for the debt relief. Now, this includes defaulted loans. So defaulted loans of any kind, whether that be a direct loan or a FFEL loan or a Perkins, a defaulted loan is eligible for the debt relief. Now, if you have a FFEL or Perkins loan that you consolidated before September 29th, that is also eligible. Now, the consolidation didn't have to be complete by September 29th. You just had to have submitted your consolidation application before September 29th in order for that FFEL or Perkins loan to be consolidated. Why the cutoff? Well, remember those lawsuits I mentioned before? And you remember one of them I said had some baby teeth to it? The majority of the teeth that that particular lawsuit had was hanging their hat on the FFEL loans. So unfortunately, the Department of Education had to make the hard decision to sacrifice the few to save the many. So when that lawsuit was filed, which was right around September 28th or 29th, that's when the Department of Education cut off the ability for commercially held FFEL and Perkins to be able to consolidate to access the debt relief. They were potentially harming about 4 million borrowers in order to hopefully save the debt relief for the remaining 38 million. It's awful. We're hoping, and the Department of Education has said that they are going to continue to work to try to find a solution to loop those FFEL and Perkins back in. But as of today, October 12th, unfortunately, commercially held FFEL or Perkins are not eligible for the debt relief, unless, of course, those loans happen to be in default. Now, if you're still not sure whether you have a direct loan or a FFEL, or whether your loan's commercially held, or whether it's Department of Education held, there's two more quick ways you can figure it out. Number one, if your loan is eligible for the COVID pause, and that means you have not been due for a payment since March of 2020, your loan's eligible for the debt relief because only Department of Ed held loans are eligible for the COVID pause. Also, the COVID pause gave you a 0% interest rate. So right now, if you're showing a 0% interest rate, then your loan is potentially eligible for the debt relief. And finally, if you're still not sure, you can call your loan servicer and ask them, do you have a direct loan or do you have a FFEL? If you have a FFEL, is it owned by the Department of Education or is it what we call commercially held? And again, a commercially held FFEL loan, unfortunately, at this point is not eligible for the debt relief. Okay, another piece of the debt relief eligibility is income. In order to be eligible for the relief, you have to have had an adjusted gross income, or AGI, of no more than $125,000 for either tax year 2020 or 2021. And that's the limit for a single borrower or for a married borrower who files their taxes as married filing separately. Now, just to be clear, if you were over in 2020 but under in 2021, you qualify. Same for vice versa. But if you were over the 125 AGI in both 2020 or 2021, you will not qualify for this debt relief. And this debt relief is pretty much all or nothing. So, I actually had a borrower this morning who their AGI was $200 more than the limit of the 125. And unfortunately, they're not eligible for any debt relief. Now, if you're married and you file your taxes as married, that AGI jumps up to $250,000 for the married couple. And again, that's AGI, not gross. And it's for either tax year 2020 or tax year 2021. Where it gets a little confusing is that if you were in school and considered a dependent student, so basically if you were an undergraduate student and you were under 24 years old, chances are you were considered a dependent student. There's other ways to not be a dependent student, but the vast majority of undergraduate students under 24 years old are going to be considered dependent students for financial aid purposes. Now, and that's an important distinction. I'm not talking about dependent tax-wise. I'm talking dependent for financial aid purposes. So if you were considered a dependent student for financial aid purposes, and you were actually in school, enrolled and taking classes between July 1st, 2021 and June 30th of 2022, you can still qualify for the forgiveness, but it's going to be based on your parents' income, not yours. And even if you are completely self-supportive, but you meet that scenario, they're going to base it on your parents' income. Now, I've been asked in the past, is there a way to appeal this? As of right now, there's been no guidance given as a way for someone to appeal whether the forgiveness is based on their income or their parents. I suspect there will not be, but at this point, we have not had any guidance either way. Now, if you do qualify, you have the right kind of loan, and you meet the income requirements, what you'll get forgiven is up to $10,000, and that's for everybody who's potentially eligible. If at any point you received a Pell Grant at any time in your academic career, then that forgiveness jumps up to no more than $20,000. Now, when I say a Pell Grant at any time in your career, I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's say you have Parent Plus loans for your kids going to school, but back 25 years ago, when you yourself was in school, you took out a Pell Grant, then you're potentially eligible for the 20 grand. Let's say you got a Pell Grant for undergrad, but you didn't take out any loans for undergrad, but you did take out loans for grad. You're potentially eligible for the 20 grand. It doesn't matter when you took out the Pell, but if you were awarded a Pell Grant, then you're potentially eligible for the 20 grand. Now, a lot of people don't remember if they ever got a Pell. You can see if you got a Pell Grant by logging on to your studentaid.gov account, but only if the Pell Grant was awarded in 1994 or later. If it was awarded prior to 1994, it's not going to show up there, but the Department of Education still has the data. You're just going to unfortunately have to wait and be surprised if you did go to school prior to 94 and don't remember whether you had a Pell Grant or not. Now, in most cases, if you owe less than the amount of forgiveness you're eligible for, you're not going to get a refund. You're going to get a zero balance, but you're not going to get a refund. Now, you'll notice on the slide you have in front of you that I've put an asterisk next to that, and I'm going to explain the ifs, the buts, and the maybes associated with that statement. But again, general rule, if you owe less than the 10 grand that you're eligible for, the 20 grand that you're eligible for, you're not going to get a check for the difference. So let's say you only owe 8 grand and you're eligible for the 20, you're not going to get a $12,000 check unless you meet a criteria that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Now, The eligibility for this is actually per borrower, not per family. So let's say you have Jack and Jill and two parents, and all four of those people have student loans. And based on income, all four of those people are potentially eligible for forgiveness. Then all four of those people are going to potentially get the $10,000 or $20,000 forgiveness on each of them, because again, it's borrower based, not family based. Before I get into refunds, I see that the question panel has been a little bit busy. I think we'll start with Ben. Ben, is there anything that I've covered so far that you're getting a lot of questions about and you think might need some clarification?
No, I think you're going to cover a lot of them. I'm just trying to knock out a few while we can so we don't get buried by questions. But I think you're going to actually get to a lot of the questions. You'll answer them later on in the slide deck.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Let's talk about refunds. So again, in most cases, you should not expect a refund. However, if you made payments during COVID when you weren't required to, so in other words, you've been enjoying the 0% interest rate since March of 2020, and you haven't actually gotten a bill for payments, but you decided to be a good doobie, take advantage of the 0% interest rate and make payments anyway, and that those payments brought you below your forgiveness threshold, then you will automatically get a refund. So let me give you an example. Actually, I have some examples coming up, so bear with me for a second. Now, if you paid your loan off in full during COVID, you could actually get a call and get a refund, and ask for that balance to be opened back up. And if you're eligible for the forgiveness, you get to keep the refund and that balance will be forgiven. Now, if you ask for a refund and you're not eligible for the forgiveness, or you're not eligible for as much forgiveness as you thought, then you're going to have a balance and you're going to have to repay it. So if you're not sure if you're eligible and you end up asking for a refund, that you might want to hang on to that money until the forgiveness goes through, just to make sure. If you paid your loan off via consolidation, you cannot get a refund for any payments made prior to that consolidation, even if the payments were made during COVID, so since March of 2020. If the loan wasn't eligible for COVID at all, then you're not eligible for any refunds. You're also not eligible for the debt relief, as we mentioned before, under the eligible loan piece. Now, here's one that's tricky. If there are some people that chose to refinance their federal loans into a private loan, say with like a SoFi or an Earnest, we are still waiting for additional guidance on this. There was some chatter before that the Department of Education was even allowing these loans to be opened back up, get a refund, and get forgiveness on the difference. And then they sort of quietly shut that down for a minute. I think there's a chance they might be opening that back up, but that's speculation on my part. If you are someone that refinanced their loans during COVID, and you think you might be eligible for the debt relief from an income perspective, if I were you, I would keep checking in with your servicer every few weeks, at least for the next month or two, and see if they start allowing those refunds to happen again. Again, I think the Department of Education might still be working through this particular decision. It may turn out that they may never open that back up again, but I do know that there's still some. It's an open question, so it's certainly worth checking in on it, maybe every few weeks, to see if they'll let you get the refund on that refinance loan. So let's look at a couple of examples so you can see what I mean. In this example, George has all direct loans, and remember, direct loans are absolutely eligible for the debt relief. They're also eligible for the COVID pause, because remember, any loan that's eligible for the COVID pause is eligible for the debt relief. It's a coincidence in that they both have the same eligibility definitions under them. So when the pause began on March 13th of 2020, George owed $23,000 in direct loans. Now, during the pause, he took advantage of the 0% interest rate, and he paid between March of 2020 and now, he's paid about $6,000. So now his balance is down to $17,000. George knows that he did get a Pell Grant during his academic career, so his income is below the threshold, so he knows that he's eligible for $20,000 in debt relief. George doesn't have to do anything. Once the Department of Ed applies that $20,000 in debt relief, George is automatically going to get a check from the Treasury of $3,000. Let's look at another example. This time we have Zeke. Zeke also has all direct loans, which of course are eligible for the COVID pause. When the pause began on March 13th of 2020, Zeke owed a total of $17,000. During the pause, he didn't make any payments. He did receive a Pell Grant during his academic career, and he meets the income threshold, so he's also eligible for $20,000 in debt relief. Once they apply that $20,000 in debt relief, he'll have a zero balance, but he's not going to get a refund, and that's because he didn't make any payments during the COVID pause. Any questions about the refunds? Or maybe should I do some more analogies before I move on to the application process? Let's start with Elaine. And don't forget you're on mute, Elaine.
Sorry about that. No questions about refunds right now that I see flagged. However, I believe it would be helpful because I think we have some listeners on here who may still be borrowing. So the cutoff for the forgiveness on having an outstanding balance would be helpful to clarify.
That's a great point. So they did do a cutoff for new loans for this forgiveness. And that cutoff is that the loan has to have at least had a disbursement sent to the school no later than June 30th of 2022. Now, a lot of people, they get their loans approved over the summer, but they don't actually get dispersed. Assuming you're in a typical September to May academic year, the first disbursement for those loans tends not to go out until the end of August, beginning of September. If that's your situation, that loan is not eligible for debt relief. Now, if you have older loans, they are, but that particular loan is not eligible for debt relief. Consolidation, unless you have a FFEL loan, in which case you would have had to have consolidated by before September 29th. But that June 30th date doesn't apply to consolidations. It only applies to new loans for people that are in school right now. Speaking of which, this is a good time to mention, you should never borrow anticipating loan forgiveness. What's happening today with this debt relief is a once in a lifetime situation. The stars had to have been aligned perfectly for this to happen. It is almost certainly never going to happen again. So again, if you're borrowing now, your loan likely isn't going to be eligible for this debt relief, and it's very unlikely there will be future debt relief that looks like this. So again, never borrow anticipating forgiveness.
And Betsy, one more clarification that I'm seeing pop up quite a bit is the idea of dependency status and the relationship to being claimed as a dependent on taxes.
So how you're claimed on your parents' taxes has zero relevance to this debt relief. When we say dependent status for the purpose of this debt relief eligibility, we're talking about whether you're considered a dependent student or an independent student for financial aid purposes. To be considered, so if you're a graduate student, you're an independent. If you're married, you're an independent. If you're 24 or over, you're an independent. If you have dependents of your own, children, pets don't count, then you're an independent. If you're a veteran or an orphan, you're an independent. Pretty much everybody else is a dependent. Even if you 100% support yourself even if your parents have not claimed you on their taxes for years. If you're an undergraduate student and you're under 24 years old and you're not a veteran, you're not married, you don't have kids of your own, you're not an orphan, then you almost certainly are a dependent for financial aid purposes, and therefore your eligibility for this debt relief will be based on your parents' income. How's that, Elaine?
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Let's talk about the application. So there's about 8 million of you out there who aren't going to have to do a darn thing. You're going to wake up one day and say, oh my goodness, look, my student loan balance is lower, and it's going to be a wonderful day. The way you know if you're one of those lucky 8 million is you're going to get an email ahead of time from the Department of Education saying, hey, you're eligible for some loan forgiveness, and we're about to give it to you unless you tell us not to. There is going to be an opt-out process for the people that are automatically eligible. Why in the world would someone want to opt out, you ask? Well, there are some people who actually could lose out from this. The biggest risk I see are if you live in a state that that considers this forgiveness as taxable income, and there's only about a half dozen states. Massachusetts is not one of them. We know that, but if you live in one of those 6 states, there are some people that could potentially be at risk of losing state welfare benefits because the forgiveness being taxed as income at the state level will put them over the threshold for that particular program. There are other people who are pursuing public service loan forgiveness that is not taxed in any state. So they would prefer to just get everything forgiven under PSLF rather than getting taxed a little bit in their state under this debt relief. But again, here in Massachusetts, they're not taxing it as income. It's not being taxed as income on the federal level. So chances are most people here will have no interest in opting out. Now, if you're people that filled out the FAFSA in the last year or so, or have applied for or certified their income under an income-driven repayment plan in the last couple of years, are generally going to be the people that won't have to apply. It'll just happen to them magically one day. Now, everybody else is going to have to apply. We do know that the Department of Ed has said that the application is going to be live sometime soon. They've definitely committed to October. It could be while we're on this call. It might not be for another week. I can tell you that yesterday they did a press conference and gave people sort of a sneak peek of what the application is going to look like. And here it is. It could not be any simpler. It starts off with an explanation of how it works. Then you fill in your name. Then you fill in your SSN. Then you do it again to make sure you got it right. Date of birth, contact information, promise not to lie under penalty of perjury. And that's it. You sign it and you are done. No documents to upload, no application to fill out, nothing to certify. You just fill out that information, sign on penalty of perjury, and submit it. The deadline to apply for this, if you're someone that actually will have to apply, is December 31st of 2023. For those people who apply for forgiveness before the middle of November, the Department of Education had previously stated that they're going to try very hard to get that forgiveness processed before payments restart. The COVID waiver ends and payments restart in January. I don't know if they've moved that promise out a little bit. They may have, because the court cases have slowed things down a little bit. The Department of Education, in response to the court case where there's a hearing today, has committed to not processing any forgiveness until at least October 23rd. So that may have pushed out this commitment to get it processed, get, the people that apply early processed by January. But I do know that's something they're still trying very hard to do. If you're someone that stands to be brought to zero and not owe any more in your student loans due to this debt relief, and they haven't processed yours by the time payments resume in January, you have a couple of options. You can either call the servicer and ask for what's called forbearance, and that will put your account on hold so no payments are due, are due. Or you can make the payments and expect to get a refund once they apply your debt relief. Again, assuming the debt relief brings your balance to zero and makes your loan paid in full. Now, if you want to make sure that you know the minute the application's available, there's a place to sign up for email alerts over at studentaid.gov. Now, I will tell you that they are expecting that at least 5 million people could be selected for what we're calling verification. So remember I said that penalty of perjury when you submit the application. That's a very serious legal term. And it basically translates to we're not messing around here, and you can be in a world of hurt if you make stuff up as part of this application. And part of the way they're going to try to, minimize fraud is that there are going to be possibly, 5 million people or more that get selected for what's called verification after you've submitted your application, at which point you'll be required to submit proof of income. And this is a little bit about what it would look like if you to receive that request. Now, they haven't given guidance on this, but I suspect if you get a notice like this and don't submit by a certain amount of time, the deadline is listed on the letter, they'll likely reverse your debt relief. And if it turns out that you provided inaccurate information, you absolutely could be prosecuted. I know the Office of the Inspector General is the enforcement arm for the Federal Department of Education, and I know that they will be watching this very, very, very closely. In addition to this verification action, I guarantee you there will be audits that go on in the background that you may not even realize happen by the OIG, by the Government Accountability Office, and so on. So, if you're not eligible because your income is over the threshold and you're tempted to give it a shot anyway, the penalty is not worth the risk in my mind. Now, once they process your loan forgiveness, the Department of Ed has given out information about how they're going to apply the forgiveness. Now, if you're someone that has loans in both the direct loan program as well as maybe the FFEL program, maybe some of your loans are in default, maybe some of them aren't, what they're trying to do is get rid of the to use the technical term, the yuckiest loans first. So the first loans they're going to get rid of is they're going to look to see if you have any loans in default. And if you do, they're going to apply the forgiveness to those loans first. If you don't have any defaulted loans, then they're going to apply it first to the loan with the highest interest rate. If all your interest rates are the same, they're next going to apply it to any unsubsidized loans that you have. If you don't have any unsubsidized loans, they're going to apply it to what's left, which are the subsidized loans. If all things are equal, they're going to apply it to the youngest loan. So the loan that has accrued the least amount of interest. And from there, if still everything's the same, they're going to apply it to the loan with the lowest balance. Now, once they've applied this forgiveness, they're going to what we call re-amortize the loan. So they're going to figure out how many years you have left to pay under your repayment plan and redo the math and figure out what your new payment needs to be to still pay it off within that term. So unless you're on a plan that's based on your income, your payment's going to go down after they apply this loan forgiveness and after they re-amortize the loan. If you are on an income-driven plan, your payment is very likely to stay the same because in that case, your payment's based on income. It's not based on your balance. Now, as I mentioned, the forgiven amount will not be taxed at the federal level. It will also not be taxed in the fine Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but there are about 6 or 7 states that it is on the books that it would be taxed. Some of them are trying to change that. It's just not clear whether there's enough time to change that due to the legislative calendars in those particular states. We sort of talked about this already. There's a lot of people that are anxious because they keep hearing about all these lawsuits that I've mentioned and that pop up in the news that are trying to say that the president didn't have the authority to do this debt relief in the first place and they should can the whole thing. As I mentioned before, the vast majority of them don't have any teeth. Some I would say were outright silly and they should be ashamed of themselves. There is one that appears to have baby teeth. That's the one that's in a hearing today. But the Department of Ed has already taken steps to try to pull those teeth. So I'm not particularly worried about it. Now, you should also know, in all fairness and in all honesty, future presidents can revoke executive actions by prior presidents. So, of course, there's always the chance that whomever's in office after our current president could reverse the loan forgiveness. I think that's extremely unlikely because it certainly would not increase their popularity. It would create an enormous mess, especially depending on how long it had been since the balances had been forgiven. So I think the chances of a future president revoking this debt relief after the horse is already out of the barn is slim to none. All right, I think that's all we had for the broad debt relief. I'll start with Ben. Ben, is there anything that you think either I didn't cover or you think I need to cover more?
Sorry, Betsy. No, I think we're getting some of these questions are just very in the weeds, and I don't know if we're going to be able to get to all of them during the time allotted today. So we're trying to answer them best we can. But I think you're getting to a lot of the questions people have about which loans would get hit first, kind of the waterfall approach to how the forgiveness would be applied. And then could you maybe tell people how will they know if they're getting automatic forgiveness?
You'll get an email.
Thanks. One other one, Betsy, that I'm seeing a couple sort of repeats of. For folks that didn't file taxes, what do they need to be concerned about anything? How will they show that they qualify?
Well, hopefully they won't get picked for verification, but if they do get picked for verification, I'm sure the Department of Ed will have other alternative ways to prove income. Generally, when we see stuff like this in other programs where you have to prove income, they'll take W-2s or sometimes they'll take a self-certification statement. And I suspect that they'll do something like that. If your income is through Social Security, you send in, copies of the Social Security stubs. But I'm sure they're going to use similar methods for this. I've had people ask me if they can change how the money is applied to the account. The Department of Ed hasn't given guidance on that either way. My gut tells me that you won't be able to adjust it, but my gut's only 70% sure on that. But again, we would have to wait for additional guidance. Elaine, did you notice any trends that you think I should address about this debt relief before I move on to the next waiver?
Sorry, I have the phone and the computer. I have to unmute. I always forget one. As of right now, I think, like Ben said, yes, we're getting into some of the personal situations. And some of them we just honestly don't have the answers for yet. One example is if you are required to, it seems like maybe these are some parents who might be providing the income for their student to qualify and they're divorced. I just get a question about that, which is an interesting scenario.
That is an interesting scenario. I suspect the answer. So Elaine's right. We don't have the answer for that yet. If I was forced to speculate, I would guess that they will deal with it the same way they deal with the FAFSA, which is it'll be based on the parent who provides at least 50% of the support.
Perfect. Yep. So that was one that kind of stuck out to me because we don't have an answer for that one quite yet.
So essentially, whatever parent you put on the FAFSA is my guess is what they're going to look at. Okay. Let's talk about the public service loan forgiveness waiver. Now, this one's almost over. The deadline for the PSLF temporary waiver is October 31st. Now, before you start panicking, let me be very clear. Public service loan forgiveness itself is not going away. It's just this temporary waiver that is very generous as far as giving eligibility to months that normally would not be considered eligible for public service loan forgiveness purposes. So the webinar, the information on PSLF is a 90-minute webinar all by itself. And while I'd be thrilled to talk about student loans for hours and hours and hours, for some reason, I don't find a lot of takers. So for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to do not a 10,000 foot level, but a 5,000 foot level overview of the regular PSLF rules and the waiver rules and why October 31st is so important. If you want more details, I suggest you go to our website, which is freestudentloanadvice.org, and go to our PSLF page. It's pretty thorough, if I do say so myself, and even better, it has a linked document with dozens and dozens and dozens of FAQs and case studies that we find that a lot of borrowers really find helpful. So let's talk PSLF. So public service loan forgiveness is a program that was written into law in 2007 by Bush II. And what it does, its intention is to forgive the balance of certain federal student loans after the borrower has made 120 payments based on their income while working full-time in the public service arena. Now, the key to traditional PSLF rules is that you have to make 120 eligible payments on an eligible loan while working for an eligible employer. The key here is that all three of these things have to happen at exactly the same time in order for that month to count towards 120 you need for PSLF. So for example, you could be making an eligible payment on an eligible loan, but if you're not working for an eligible employer at the time, that month can never ever count. You could be making a payment under the wrong payment plan, but on an eligible loan while working full-time for an eligible employer. And under traditional PSLF rules, that month cannot count. So again, traditional PSLF rules, the basic eligibility is you're making 120 eligible payments on an eligible loan while working for an eligible employer. Now, this slide explains and defines all of the eligibles, but at a high level. So essentially, under traditional PSLF rules, the only type of eligible loan is a federal direct loan. Doesn't matter when it was made. And remember, a direct loan can be a Stafford loan, whether it be subsidized or unsubsidized, graduate plus loan, parent plus loan, or consolidation. Now, if you have Fell or Perkins, you can make those loans eligible by consolidating them into the direct loan program. Now, normally when you do that, your PSLF payment count starts at 0. Normally, consolidation, no matter what you're consolidating, restarts your PSLF count to 0. And under traditional PSLF rules, it does that as well. But as you'll see in a minute, under the waiver, that's not the case. And that's, if you need to consolidate, you're someone that needs to definitely take action by 1031. Now, an eligible payment for traditional PSLF rules is a payment that's made on time, on or after October 1st, 07, because the program didn't exist before that. Be made under either a 10-year standard repayment plan or one of the income-driven repayment plans. It has to be, payments under traditional PSLF rules, payments made prior to consolidation are not going to be counted. And payments made while you're in default are not going to count. And finally, our final eligible is eligible employment. Now, listen, for PSLF, this is where most of the myths exist when it comes to PSLF. In particular, for PSLF, it actually doesn't matter at all what you do for a living. What matters is who you work for. So if you work for a government employer, and that can be federal, state, local, tribal, it doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter what your role or your day-to-day responsibilities are. If you're a full-time employee of that government employer, then that's considered PSLF eligible employment. Same if you work for a 501c3 nonprofit. In fact, there's other nonprofits that aren't 501c3s that are also eligible, but they have to jump through a couple extra hoops, but they're eligible. Your other option is to work a minimum of 30 hours a week for multiple eligible employers. So you can be part-time at 2 different 501c3s. As long as you're working at least 30 hours a week between the 2 of them, then it's going to count for PSLF purposes. Now, you do have to be a direct employee. In other words, contractors don't count unless the contractor in and of themselves are a PSLF eligible employer. If you need more information about the traditional PSLF rules, as I mentioned, you can go to our website, freestudentloanadvice.org, and go to the PSLF page. That link is also at the end of this presentation. Now, let's talk about the PSLF waiver. Last October, about a year and a week ago, the Department of Education announced this temporary PSLF waiver. The idea behind it is to sort of give a Hail Mary pass to people that might have thought they were progressing towards PSLF, only to find out they had the wrong type of loan, or they were under the wrong plan, or one of many other reasons why that payment might not have counted. So what they're doing under this waiver is as long as you were working full-time for an eligible employer during that month, they're going to count the month. Doesn't matter if you made the payment on a FFEL loan, doesn't matter if the payment was late, doesn't matter what payment plan the payment was made under. As long as you weren't in default, and you were working full-time for a PSLF eligible employer, they're going to count that payment towards PSLF. Excuse me. Now, in order to take advantage of this waiver, if you do have FFEL or Perkins, you have to apply for loan consolidation before 1031 of this year to get credit under the waiver. You also need to make sure that you submit proof of at least one period of PSLF eligible employment prior to 1031. Now, again, neither the consolidation application nor the PSLF application actually have to have been processed by 1031 to count. In fact, the PSLF application doesn't even need to be sent by 1031. It just needs to have been generated by what's called the PSLF help tool, which is located at studentaid.gov, or it has been signed off on by your human resources department or whatever other authorized official you might be using at your employer by 1031. Now, they're not going to count periods of default. And for the most part, unfortunately, this does not apply to Parent Plus loans. The exception to that is if you're someone who holds Parent Plus loans, but you also are still paying loans from your own schooling. If you consolidate those together before the waiver's over, they will give that consolidation, the whole consolidation, including the Parent Plus part, credit for any PSLF payments that you made on the non-Parent Plus loans. They're even going to eventually count periods where you may have been in deferment or forbearance, as long as you were working full-time for an eligible employer at the time. And I'm going to talk more about that when we get to the income-driven plan waiver. Now, normally, you can't double dip forgiveness programs, but there's all kinds of exceptions for that going on right now. And one of those exists within this PSLF waiver. Now, there's another forgiveness program called teacher loan forgiveness. Now, the way teacher loan forgiveness works is if you work 5 consecutive years as a teacher in a low-income school called a Title I school, then the Department of Education is going to forgive between $5,000 and $17,500 on your federal student loans. Now, normally, you can't double dip those 5 years. So if you got, say, between the years 2010 and 2015, you worked at the Title I eligible school, then you got teacher loan forgiveness, you normally would not be able to turn around and then use that same period of 2010 to 2015 to count towards the 10 years you need for public service loan forgiveness. But under the waiver, you can. But you need to make sure you submit proof of that employment before 10/31. Again, it doesn't have to be processed by then, just submitted by then. Couple more cool things about the waiver. If you consolidate, so let's say you have Fell or Perkins, and you need to consolidate into the direct loan program, you need to have at least submitted the application by October 31st. If you have direct loans and Fell loans, if you consolidate them together, or if you even have all direct loans but from different periods of time, if you consolidate them, not only will it not reset your PSLF count to 0, which is usually what happens when you consolidate, but they're actually going to give you credit on that whole consolidation for the highest PSLF count possible. So for example, let's say you had undergraduate loans. You went to undergrad, you took out loans, you graduated, you worked for the city of Boston for 2 years. Then you went back to school, got your graduate degree, took out graduate loans, and when you graduated, you left and started working for the town of Plymouth for 2 years. At this point, your undergraduate loans would have 48 PSLF payments under its belt, and the graduate loans would only have 24. Normally, under traditional PSLF rules, you'd end up getting forgiveness on the undergraduate loans first, because they'd hit 120 first. And then later on, after another couple of years, you'd get forgiveness on the graduate loans. And under normal PSLF rules, if you consolidated the two together, it would revert down to 0. If you consolidate submit the consolidation application before 10/31, not only will it not revert to 0, but the whole consolidation will get credit for the higher count, which in this example would be the 48 payments. Now, what hasn't changed is the definition of eligible employment. In order for any of these months to count, you do still have to be working for an eligible employer full-time during that period. You do not, however, need to be working for an eligible employer at the time you submit these applications for forgiveness. Normally, you would have to still be working, but we've worked with a bunch of borrowers that have actually retired, but they already had the 10 years under their belt, so under the waiver, they were actually able to get their loans forgiven. Now, to get credit under the waiver, you don't have to have gotten to the 120th payment by this October. Let's say this only gives you credit for, say, 50 payments. Those 50 payments will carry on with you and you can continue to accrue more payments until you get to the 120. It just means that after the waiver is over, so after October, but really after January, when payments restart, you have to make sure that you're following the traditional PSLF rules in order to accrue additional payments. Just as to reiterate, because it's important, under the temporary waiver, again, consolidation does not reset the forgiveness count. It might look like it when you first do it. It's kind of a scary process. Because first of all, the consolidation application still says, warns you that it'll reset your count. Because that's what normally happens outside of this waiver. And then when the consolidation is first completed and you get your first PSLF letter in the mail, it's probably not going to reflect the pre-consolidation payments. It's probably only going to say that you have 1 or 2 payments. Don't freak out. Once they get the data of the payments from your pre-consolidation loans from the Department of Education, they'll update the count again. And if it turns out you consolidated more than once, they will look back behind each one of those consolidations for the PSLF waiver. Just to sort of set expectations, this is an enormous project. They've received millions of public service loan forgiveness certification forms. So it's taking a minute. On average, from the time you submit your first public service loan forgiveness form, it's about 120 days before you get your first review. Now, I've said average multiple times because I've seen people get it much faster. I've seen people have it take 2-3 times as long. None of those are wrong. It's just the way it falls. There is no way to get yours escalated. There is nobody on the planet that can get you to the front of the line. That includes me. That includes the Secretary of the Department of Education. It includes your members of Congress. It includes filing an ombudsman complaint or a CFPB complaint. No one borrower is more important than another. So they are processing files. Things got slowed down last month because the files from the Department of Education slowed down, and those files slowed down because of the announcement of the debt relief. They sort of had to quickly change priorities on direction of the White House to make sure the debt relief was up and running as soon as possible. But my understanding is the files are starting to flow again. But again, there was a little bit of an extra backlog in the past month. But again, my suggestion to you is put your patience pants on and tighten the suspenders and the belt. They will get to you. All right. Any questions about the PSLF waiver that I should cover before I get to our last waiver, which is the income-driven plan waiver? Let's start with, I don't remember who I picked on the last time. So let's start with Ben.
All right, one question for you, Betsy. Are there dates that people need to be working for an eligible employer, or is it any time that they've had the loans that, there could be PSLF eligible qualifying payments?
Anytime after October of 07 counts for the PSLF in general. And that actually includes October of 07. So I should say on or after October of 07 employment counts. As I mentioned in the beginning, we only had time to really do the 5,000 foot level on the PSLF waiver. So if this is the first you're hearing of it, I'm sure you are probably hate my guts saying that she gave us just enough information to be dangerous. I recommend that you check out either our PSLF page or the Department of Education's, and hopefully it will clear things up for you. And if it doesn't, you can always email us your questions. Okay, I'm not sure if Elaine is still with us. I know she had a conflict for the last bit of this, But Elaine, if you are still here and something you think I need to address, just yell. Okay. The last waiver I want to talk about is what we're calling the IDR waiver, or the income-driven plan waiver. Income-driven plan is sort of an umbrella term that we in the industry use to talk about all the different repayment plans that are based on your income. There's a whole bunch of them, and I'm going to go over them in a minute, but they're all exactly the same except where they're different. So if you hear me say IDR, D as in dog, then I'm talking about all the plans. If you hear me say something like IBR, B as in Betsy or boy, I'm talking about a specific plan. Or same if I say repay, or ICR, C as in cat, or pay as you earn. I'm talking about specific plans, but IDR is an umbrella term for all the income-driven plans. So the IDR waiver was announced back in April, and unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of updates on it. They did originally say they were going to be implementing it in the fall. I heard from the COO of the Department of Ed, Richard Cordray, a couple weeks ago that they'd postponed it to the summer. Now I'm hearing that it's a little bit of both, that they may be implementing some of it this fall, but most of it may not get implemented now until next summer. And a lot of that is related to the broad debt relief, which again is the White House's priority. Now, eligible loans for the IDR waiver are pretty much the same as they are for the PSLF waiver. Any loan held by the Department of Education, whether it's a FEL loan or a Perkins loan or a direct loan, if the loan was consolidated and so on. Essentially, if your loan is eligible for the COVID pause, it's eligible for this waiver. If it wasn't eligible for the COVID pause, but it's a federal loan, not a private loan, you can still consolidate it to make it eligible for the IDR waiver. As of right now, the deadline to do that is January of 2023. I don't anticipate that deadline is going to shorten at all. It actually could get longer, but you have at least until January of 2023 to consolidate if you need to. They're essentially doing with the IDR waiver what they did with PSLF. Let's go over a high level of the traditional income-driven plan rules that apply to all the income-driven plans. Now, under the income-driven plans, the way it works is that they set your payment based on your income and your family size. If your income is really low, or you have a Duggar's worth of kids, you could very well end up with a $0 payment. And that payment counts towards income-driven plan forgiveness as well as potentially public service loan forgiveness. Now, you do have to reapply for the plan on an annual basis. That's been on hold due to COVID, but people will have to start doing that again in, I think, late 2023 or 2024. If you stay on these income-driven plans for 20 or 25 years, which is dependent on the plan, then the Department of Education forgives the rest of your balance. If you consolidate, it does reset your income-driven plan count under traditional income-driven plan rules. Now, the income-driven plans include, now remember, I said they're all exactly the same except where they're different. Not only that, we have two plans that are called exactly the same thing, and they have completely different rules. And that is what we call old IBR, and that plan applies to both FEL loans and direct loans. We have new IBR, we have pay-as-you-earn, revised pay-as-you-earn, income contingent repayment, which is really the only one Parent Plus borrowers can use. And coming to a theater near you, there's going to be another income-driven plan. We're hoping to see the draft rules for that in the next couple weeks and see it implemented sometime next year. Supposedly, it's a very attractive plan. But after that, we're going to have 6 different income-driven plans instead of the 5 that we already have. So again, that's traditional PSLF rules. Under this waiver, as I mentioned a minute ago, they're essentially going to do very similar to what they did with the PSLF waiver. they're going to give people credit for every single month that they were in repayment towards the income-driven plan forgiveness, even if they've never been in an income-driven plan. So if let's say you had FFEL loans and you've been in repayment since the year 2000, if you consolidated before January, before they actually do the adjustment on your account, you potentially could get your loans forgiven right away because you already have 20 years of repayment under your belt once they do the adjustment. Now, we're not clear how far back they're going to go. One speculation is they'll go back to 1994 because that's when the first income-driven plan was created. There's some people that think they'll only go back to, say, 2009, which is when the first really heavily used income-driven plan was implemented. And then there's everything in between. And then there's also the possibility they could go back till the dawn of student loans. We just don't know. And until we get additional guidance, we won't know. But if you have FFEL or Perkins loans and have been in repayment for, at least 10 years, you probably will benefit by consolidating into the direct loan program before January and getting credit under this income-driven plan waiver. Now, after they make the adjustment, if you want to continue to accrue income-driven plan payments, you will have to actually get on an income-driven plan. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Not everybody's going to end up with loan forgiveness. If your income is high related to your balance and you're not darn close to forgiveness already, chances are pretty good that you'll end up paying your loans off before seeing forgiveness. So it's important to run the numbers and figure out the best bang for your buck. And remember, under both the PSLF waiver as well as the income-driven plan waiver, if you consolidate after the waiver deadline, then your payment counts could very well reset to 0. As an added bonus, under this one-time adjustment, they're also going to count for some people, months that they've been in a forbearance. They're going to count that towards the income-driven plan forgiveness, as well as assuming that they were working full-time for eligible employer at the time. They're also going to count it towards PSLF. Same for deferments. With the exception of an in-school deferment, any deferment period prior to 2013, when they do this one-time adjustment, they're going to count those as income-driven plan payments. And if you were working full-time for an eligible employer at the time, they're going to count it towards PSLF. Deferments after 2013 still won't count unless it's what we call an economic hardship deferment. Same with forbearance. Forbearances after the one-time adjustment are not going to count towards either PSLF or the income-driven plans. Now, we're not sure what types of, there's unfortunately probably a dozen or more different types of forbearances. Most of them happen behind the scenes and you don't even know they exist. We're not 100% sure what types of forbearances they're going to count. We do know for a fact that they're not going to count bankruptcy forbearance, which is what they put your account in while you are going through bankruptcy, whether your loans are involved in it or not, in many cases. We strongly suspect, or in fact, we'll go as far as to say, are very confident that they will count forbearance that we call voluntary or discretionary forbearance, which is the ones that borrowers tend to be the most familiar with. This is the one where you just call the servicer and say, I'm experiencing financial hardship, I can't pay, and they put your loan on hold. What they're doing is putting you under what we call voluntary or discretionary forbearance. But we're not sure with everything in between. There's forbearances if you're in a fellowship. There's forbearances that they use to make adjustments on your account, or if you submit your income-driven plan paperwork late. Those are called administrative forbearances. We don't know if those are going to count. They usually don't, but things are so weird right now, I hesitate to say that for a fact. So sort of stay tuned on that one. Now, just like the PSLF waiver, any payments you made prior to consolidation will be counted towards this IDR benefit. What it doesn't include are payments made on a default. As I said, periods of bankruptcy forbearance, periods of in-school deferment, whether that's pre-2013 or post-2013. Payments made on a private loan, a state loan, anything other than a federal loan will not be counted. Now, as I mentioned, but it's worth mentioning again, after they make the adjustment, unless you get your loans forgiven right off the bat, almost everybody, if they want to continue to work towards income-driven plan forgiveness, is going to have to get on an income-driven plan to make sure they continue to accrue the necessary payments. A couple of reminders for timing. We're hearing chatter that some of this could be implemented this fall. I don't know which pieces or what that might look like, but most of it won't happen until next summer. If you do have to consolidate, either to get a higher count or to make your FFEL or Perkins loans eligible, do it right away. Because if they go to make the adjustment on your account, they're going to make the adjustment. And if you come back later and say, wait, I was consolidating, they're going to say, too bad. So it's really important that you consolidate right away if you think you could benefit from consolidation for this income-driven plan waiver. And there's no application for this one-time adjustment. They're just going to do it. All right. Before I talk about strategy, how are we doing on questions, Ben?
All right, so we've answered 138 and we're down to 26. Some of them are a little bit trickier, which is why I've left them. So for those of you I'm not getting back to, I apologize. We're doing the best we can.
Yeah, I want to remind people too, and I should have said this in the beginning, this is public and it's going on YouTube. So you don't necessarily want your friends and neighbors and fellow listeners to know your business. So if your question is very personal with personal information, this isn't the place for it. See if you can answer it by looking at our website or the Department of Ed's. And if you can't, you of course are welcome to email us through the contact page and the TISLA email on the contact page. All right, I'm going to finish up, Ben, and then I'm going to try to help you with the rest of these questions, the last couple minutes we have. All right, now, your head might be spinning with all these waivers because you might find that you're potentially eligible for all three of them. And so you're like, well, what do I do? Well, you can pursue all three of them. Pursuing one or another is not going to disqualify you from one or the other. The only caveat to that is if you have a FFEL loan or a Perkins loan that needs to be consolidated into the direct loan program, say to pursue PSLF, if you do that, it's going to disqualify you from the debt relief. But if you have a large balance, it might be worth foregoing. And if you have a large balance and you've already got a whole bunch of years under your belt towards PSLF, to me, it's probably worth it to forego the $10,000 or $20,000 in forgiveness and pursue the bigger program. So it doesn't really matter that you would disqualify yourself from the debt relief in that situation. But otherwise, other than that exception, for most people, there's no harm in pursuing all of them. And in fact, you should. Definitely apply for the debt relief. It's not going to disqualify you from the IDR waiver or from the PSLF waiver. Now, the name of the game here, we've talked a lot about loan forgiveness. That's the least of our concerns. That is not our goal at all. It shouldn't be your goal either. The goal is to pay the least amount over time out of pocket. Now, for some people, that might mean paying their loans off aggressively to reduce interest costs. For other people, it might mean pursuing public service loan forgiveness or this debt relief or so on. So I urge all of you to run the numbers. There's some great tools out there. We've got a calculator on our website. The Department of Education has a calculator on their website called the Loan Simulator tool that can help you figure these things out. That's also where you would go to find updates on all these things. But I also recommend that regardless of what happens with your loans over the next couple of months, that you get in the habit of doing a pulse check on your student loan strategy once a year. I recommended tax time. Just sort of get in the habit of checking on your student loan strategy around tax time. Are you paying as much as you can comfortably afford to pay? Or have you done what you needed to do to pursue your loan forgiveness program? Is this still the right repayment plan for you? Remember, the bottom line is the quicker you pay, the least you pay in interest. So again, that's why for some people, especially if their income is fairly high compared to their loan balance, you might actually save money by just paying the loans off. Everybody's different. All right, that is what I had for you. I'm gonna let Ben first let me know if there's anything he thinks I should cover. Make sure to go to the chat panel and complete the survey. I want to thank everybody for participating and coming, and I hope you spread the word about this to all your friends.
So Betsy, one thing we've answered a lot in the chat or the QA is when people will find out if they automatically qualify for forgiveness. And I don't think ED has committed to a timeline when those notifications are going to go out, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm not aware of a timeline for that either. I would expect it to be sooner rather than later. If I had to guess, I'd be surprised if people didn't get those notices by the end of November, but that's 1,000% guess on my part.
Right. I don't think that there's a huge downside to applying if you're really anxious to just get it in. But we can't really say when ED is going to have all the notifications out either. Remember that you do have, over a year here to apply for this forgiveness. And that as of right now, loans subject to the pause, payments won't start until January at the earliest. So there's not necessarily the huge time crunch like there is for the PSLF waiver.
Great tip. To the person that recommended a cough drop to clear my sinuses, thank you very much. I am, as I said, getting over a cold, but ironically, sometimes public speaking stuffs my nose. It's a weird reaction, but I will give your suggestion a try. Thank you very, very much. Someone else asked, if the loans are in your name, does that keep you out of being in dependent status? No. The dependent status and whether they're looking at your income versus your folks is exclusively based on whether you were in school between June of 2021 and July of 2022, and whether you were considered a dependent student for aid purposes. What else? Is it worth putting in a PSLF application? I'm going to reword this for clarity. Is it worth putting in a PSLF loan if I've only been working for an eligible employer for a year but plan to be there for the 10-year period? Ben, it looks like you're answering this too. I'll start from the top after this one, I promise. 1,000 times yes. If you were to ever attend one of my comprehensive PSLF webinars, one of the things I say over and over and over again is that if you're pursuing PSLF, you really need to get in the habit of submitting a PSLF proof of employment on an annual basis. That's really the best way to make sure that you're on track with that program. By the way, if anyone on this call works for a PSLF eligible employer, I would strongly encourage them both before the waiver ends and after on a regular basis to share PSLF information with the employees. PSLF can be an awesome recruitment and retainment tool. It's free to the employer, obviously. And in my experience, and we've worked with thousands of PSLF borrowers, the people that tend to be the most successful and the most educated about the program are the ones that whose employer provides them some support. And it could be as simple as the employer sending the employees a link to the Department of Ed's or our website about PSLF. Or it could be providing a webinar, or it could be something even more robust than that. We give webinars through PSLF eligible employers all the time. And we do have some room on the calendar, although it's getting tight for these last couple weeks. So it might be something you might want to recommend.
Hey, Betsy, one other question that we've been getting a lot of that I just want you to maybe speak to everyone is how this debt relief is going to be applied in terms of fees, principal, interest. I don't think that ED has publicly stated how they're going to apply it, just that they'll do it as they see fit, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I have it in my head that I saw somewhere that they're going to put it to interest first, but I might be making that up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Someone's asked, and Ben, I'm going to start from the top now. I'm going to start with the oldest one. If you've paid throughout the pandemic and they gave you a refund for those payments, do they put that refunded money back on your loan total and then give you the 10 or 20 grand? Yes, that's how it's supposed to work, assuming you're eligible for the 10 or 20 grand. So let's say in March, you owed 10 grand, March of 2020, you owed 10 grand. Over COVID, you paid back 5. It looks like you're eligible for the $20,000 in forgiveness. So you'd ask for that 5 back. Your new balance would once again show 10. And then after you applied for forgiveness and they applied it, you would then owe 0. And if it turns out that you weren't eligible for forgiveness, you'd still owe the 10, and you'd get billed the 10 and accrue interest on the 10 and have to repay the full 10. We answered the principal interest one. Student loans that are in bankruptcy and they've been making payments for 4 years. Are these loans automatic to qualify for forgiveness? I have not heard that loans in a bankruptcy status are excluded from forgiveness, but I also know that bankruptcy can be tricky. So I'm going to say I am 90% sure the answer is yes, they'd qualify, assuming that the loans themselves were qualified and assuming that you met the income criteria. But again, bankruptcy can be tricky, so I want to leave a tiny part of that as a maybe. Someone who has a defaulted loan that used to be a teach grant. Defaulted loans are, assuming they're federal student loans, defaulted loans are eligible for the debt relief, assuming the borrower is eligible for the debt relief. Now, with that said, you should still consider having your friend or relative or whomever it is resolve the default. There's a program called Fresh Start, which is another waiver. We just didn't have enough time to cover all the waivers today. That allows borrowers to sort of a one-time get out of default with no extra collection costs, removes the default line from the credit report. It also, it does not remove the delinquencies that led up to the default. So the 90-day delinquency, the 180-day delinquency, etc. Those still stay for the 7 years. But you should contact whoever's collecting on the defaulted loans, or I'm sorry, have the borrower do it, and ask about the Fresh Start program. But again, as far as the broad debt relief goes, assuming you're otherwise eligible, it does qualify. All right, I am going to answer one more, and then I'm going to let Ben pick one more, and then we have reached our time, so I'm going to give you all your lives back. This is a good question. It's a PSLF question. I had 2 different loans, or 2 different servicers, and the borrower's been paying towards both every month while they've been working for an eligible employer. They want to know if they're going to get credit for PSLF for, 1 credit, or will they get 2 credits because they were paying separately? And the answer is 1. The real answer is you could never get credit for more than 1 month in any given month for PSLF purposes. So if you had 5 loans and 5 different servicers and you made 5 different payments in May of 2022, and then you ended up consolidating those loans, you'd get credit for 1. And on each of those individual loans, you'd get credit for 1. All right. I've got almost 140. Ben,
All right,
would you?
let me answer one, and then I also have to go. I'm running late for my next appointment. I just got one, and I just want to reiterate something. Someone asked that they apply for consolidation for their loans so that they can get into PSLF. They're not direct loans at this time. Will they still be eligible for the Biden refund? Our understanding right now is no, they will not. So that is unfortunately a sort of balancing or weighing that you need to do. But yeah, consolidation loans after the 29th of September doesn't seem like those FEL loans are going to will be eligible.
Unless they find a way.
Correct. Which we, unclear at this time.
Okay.
All right, Betsy, I've got to sign off. Thanks,
Yep.
everyone.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Whose questions I did not get to.
That's okay. I knew we'd have a lot. So hopefully we send people in the right direction. Again, there's a lot of stuff we don't know yet. Things are changing by the minute. I've given you links to where you can go to see when things are updated. And I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to sign up to get notification for when the application is ready. And that's all I've got for you. Thanks again. To the Harvard University Employees Credit Union for sponsoring this and asking me to play. I had a good time.
I did too. I learned, oh my goodness, I learned so much for me personally. Thank you so much, Betsy, Ben, and Elaine. And also wanted to remind everyone to visit their website at freestudentaid.com. Oh, wait, let me make sure I get it right now. Freestudentloanadvice.org. Again, that's freestudentloanadvice.org. That's how you can get in touch with Betsy and her team. I also wanted to remind everyone that they're going to get an email of the slides and the recording today, because obviously this is chock full of information. And Betsy, you did an amazing job. And there is a survey at the end that I said at the beginning of this webinar, and you can get to it at https, actually just hubcu.org/survey. Wow. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate it. We're here to assist you and to help you definitely get on the right path with the student loan information. There's just so much information. Again, you can take the survey at the end for everyone. It's also in the chat. And we will see you next time. Have a great afternoon. And again, Betsy, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.